Hello and welcome to Books and Beyond. I'm your host, Jimmy Bennett. My show tries to highlight or showcase local talent, people that do very creative and artistic things. And today I have a very special guest, Jim Littlefield. Welcome, Jim, to the show.
Thank you, Jim.
And I want Jim to stand up because I want you to see him in his full Civil War era regalia. That is incredible. You are the part. Look at that.
Yeah, we were always pretty fastidious about dressing and reenacting.
Yeah, that is fantastic. That is really, I really love that outfit.
Thank you.
Now, I noticed that all the books you've written are historical in nature. History Matters, The Slave Catcher's Woman, and Slave Taker, The Promise, your latest one. What is your historical background? What do you...
Well, I'll tell you, I always loved history, number one. I mean, I don't know, it was just one of those inclinations that I had. Maybe my family background might have been something lent itself to that, but I did teach for 48 years. I taught history in school, so most of my professional background had to do with history as well as my private thing. My wife and I have restored 2 historic homes. We've worked on the Smith-Harris Commission in town. That's a historical place. So I write a history column for the local newspaper. Right. So I guess history's been kind of a defining theme for both of us, actually, and for me. But one book I wrote on History Matters, it has to do with an archaeological 17 years I spent teaching anthropology history in high school. And the other 2 you mentioned have to do with a hobby that my wife got involved in, my wife and I, and that was Civil War reenacting.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
So the book about local history, History Matters. I'm a history buff myself. It's like one of the only classes I ever passed all the time.
At least you're not one of those people that says, I hate that stuff.
No. History, I think I think everybody should be more in tune with their family history, their town history, their local history. Where we came from and where we're going is one of those things that...
I'm with you. I mean, I think history the past bleeds into the present, and the present bleeds into the future. I mean, it's all one thing. And if you're not going to bother with what's back there, you're really coming in unarmed for the present.
Isn't that the big saying, right? If you forget the lessons in the past, you make the same mistakes again.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
So,
but I do think there's so much energy that you can pick up from the past that just gives you a little better understanding of what's coming down the road.
And there's so many fascinating things like I remember we talked about this before, local history and stuff, and I talked about John Mason, the Battle of the Pequot against the Pequot War and stuff. And it was you the one that told me that they had a running battle from the Mystic River all the way back to Fort Griswold.
Yeah.
And I thought about it. I thought, wow, look at all that space, and did they actually run across my yard?
Well, that's what makes it personal, and that's where you start really getting into history. Once it becomes personal, your ancestors, your yard, this thing you're holding in your hand, that was there. I mean, then you start to really feel it, the energy, from it. And by the way, that mystic battle, that was fought on May 26th of 1637. And I have a 10th generation ancestor on my mother's side that was there that day.
Oh, no kidding.
He was there that day. And we actually celebrate that. Every May 26th, we have a special celebration in our home because the house that we live in happens to be part of a land grant that was given by John Mason, or given to John Mason and Lieutenant Thomas Bull, that's my ancestor, because of their success against the Mashantucket Pequots, against the Pequots.
Oh, wow.
So the land that was stolen from the Indians, 700 acres that my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather inherited, he ended up selling it to the Smiths in I think it was 1693, but we happened to stumble onto an old house and only later found out that house was on the same property as that 10th generation ancestor.
Oh, my God.
There's something pretty sacred about that.
Yeah.
So we celebrate the 26th of May, we celebrate, have it called the celebration of the cheese, it's called.
That's great. So what are some of the other things that you've come across?
I'll
teaching
tell you,
archaeology?
there's very little that we did not come across in the way of artifacts over a period of 17 years. We would go out every semester. I would take a class of seniors out for 6 weeks, and we would do an archaeological dig. We'd find a good place that we thought would satisfy history, and we would apply the proper techniques. We usually had an archaeologist with us, Dr. John Pfeiffer, and we did the right, I think, processing, and I think that we came up with some really good historical knowledge for the town of East Lyme. And we were also in Waterford. We were also in Old Lyme.
Yep.
It's about as far away as we could go so the kids could get back to second period and start their regular school day. But we did do a 300-year-old Native American hunting camp over in Old Lyme, which was fabulous. We probably found, I would say, 200 to 300 projectile points.
No kidding.
We found a hearth and a hearth feature. We were able to get a carbon dating out of it. It turned out to be a pretty great dig. Speaking of Native Americans, probably the thing that we're probably best known for was in 2009 in Waterford, finding an 800-year-old Nehantic skeleton that was buried in a fetal position. We had a lot of folks in on that. You can imagine. We had Waterford town historian, East Lyme town historian. We had homeowners. We had the two tribes, the two recognized tribes were there. The head of the tribal council. There's actually 5 tribes in the state of Connecticut. Two have federal recognition, but everybody was there, and we were even part of the reburial ceremony. So. That was pretty amazing when you can actually look someone in the eye from 800 years ago.
Right.
I mean, this person's been in the ground, and they consented, thanks to our archaeological, they consented to come up for a short visit before we helped with the reburial.
That's incredible. 800-year-old.
800 years old. We had 3 archaeologists and an assistant archaeologist. They all came up independently with the same date.
Wow.
So yeah, it was really
Would that be one of like the first of the Native Americans, or?
No. You have the first Native Americans, First Nations. Maybe you're getting 15,000 years ago.
Oh, okay.
There are people, but they are nomadic and they're not building settlements, and so you don't have any place where you have artifacts that are concentrated. So you can't find much about them. You know, when you get 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, now you start to find, they start to settle down a little bit, and you start to find evidence of their existence.
Wow.
That's what you're looking for here. But Native America, I mean, that's great stuff. Native American digs were difficult because a lot of the artifacts that you find are not things that you are not familiar with. And so it's not like finding a jackknife on a 19th century dig. I mean, we probably had more fun doing a dig from 200 years ago than we would from 800. And that is, we didn't set out to find a body. We set out to find, to prove the sign on the guy's house said 1734. We were looking for 1734. We found all that and more.
Oh, did you? Good. Yeah. Wow. I guess you did. Whoa. Yeah, it's kind of fascinating to think of, what we could be walking over every day.
Oh, absolutely.
The history that's
absolutely,
is buried below us.
Yeah,
You know?
I remember, this is not exactly the same thing, but I do remember Dr. Fye. We were doing a dig behind a cemetery, Jim, one time, and we had gotten there early in the morning, and we were about to walk. We always had to walk across the cemetery to get to this place in the back. And he stopped the whole class, and he said, "Everybody get down on their knees." And we looked across, and he said, "Look at all," and we were looking at these pockets of like mist and fog. He said, "What do you suppose that is?" And basically they were all coffins that had disintegrated, and the ground had sloped down to close them. So you could see where people were once buried.
Right.
So, when you talk about, walking on hallowed ground, we walked over those people every day for 6 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah, that was a great dig too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So after you retired, is that when you really started writing?
Well, yes, I guess I could say I did start writing earlier, only in that my wife and I got into Civil War reenacting, and I got into doing a blacksmith. She was a period portrait painter, and I decided that if I was going to do this character, I had to do a lot of research on Coswell Timms, the slave catcher. So I ended up putting the character together, and I wrote a lot there for myself. I mean, I might have had 100 pages of notes, all for a 45-minute program, I might add. Eventually, when I wanted to go from a program to a book, I had a good head start. I already had those notes. And I got to tell you this, when my wife and I were at the Smith-Harris house, we were kind of in the administrative part of it. And we used to hire reenactors to come to the site. And I used to laugh at them because they were so fastidious, and they wouldn't come out of character. And they were, kind of a pain in the neck sometimes with their expertise.
Right.
But we became them because we ended up making friends with them, and eventually said, why don't you join? And then it became a lot of fun because it wasn't just history light like you might get reading a history book. It was history intense. I mean, you were that character.
Right.
And you had to know how they felt. You had to know what they were seeing. You had to know what they were eating. You had to know the whole context of where they were. My character took place in Littlefield, Georgia. So all that had to be researched. So as I put that together, now it started to become clear to me that I'd never written a book or tried to write a book. But you know what? I had a good head start on it if I did. And so when I retired, I had actually already started 3 years before I retired. I started writing the book. And the last faculty meeting that I attended, the school, East Lyme High School, they turned the faculty meeting into a book signing. And they had the New London Day there, and the girl and her parents who did the illustrations for the book, and Rich Laporta from Husky Trail Press, and it was really heartfelt that they would do that for me. So I did write that first book and have it out just before I retired. But then I had time, so I could go out and start to do the character and present the character and market the books and stuff like that.
Just to backtrack, maybe just a little, but in the reenactments.
Yep.
Now, whenever I think of Civil War reenactments, it's always usually the big battles. That's what I see on TV or read in magazines or I've seen in books. Is there other reenactments or scenarios where you would go in this character?
Are you talking about that time period?
Yes, about Civil War?
Absolutely. In fact, the 1st Maryland, we belonged to the 1st Maryland. I did not want to be a soldier. I did not want, because I watched them marching around, and we had a cannon, and they were firing off the cannon, which was pretty cool. But I wanted to be a civilian. That's why I started out as a blacksmith. And my wife, obviously, she didn't want to be a camp wife necessarily, and she actually does paint, so that was a good thing for her. So we ended out, doing things that were not had nothing to do with the war itself, other than as a support cast.
Okay.
We were the support cast, and I really like that a lot better. I was never all that into the battles and the generals and the logistics of all of that stuff. I was always more interested in the people that were there. I was, in the new book, I spend a lot of time on some of the issues involving the civilian population of the South, which I don't think people are aware of the degree of suffering that there was down there. Right. So that gave me a chance to speak from another point of view. I did not want to talk about the Grizzly battle, and I didn't want to be a politician talking about the necessity of putting our nation back together or any of that stuff. I really wanted a character, Jim, that was on the inside of the institution. Somebody that really knew it well. And I thought about it. Of course, the fact that my wife and I happened to buy a bloodhound kind of made me think about it even more. And I said, I'm going to try doing a slave catcher. It's very politically incorrect. I recognize that right from the beginning. You know, slavery is a sticky issue, and a slave catcher, oh my God. But I thought to myself, if I could come up with a character that was honest, straightforward, who was believable, you know, maybe people would get a new perspective on this time period that a soldier wouldn't give you, or a politician, or an abolitionist, or a President Lincoln. And
Right.
I didn't want to be any of those characters. And by the way, if you're any of those characters, you have to go through a big vetting process.
Oh,
you just can't say, I think I'll be Robert E. Lee. No. You're going to go through a lot of hoops before they
Right.
vet you for that. But I can remember, Jim, the first time I ever did Coswell Timms, it was 2006, and it was for Heritage Weekend at Smith Harris House. And I was scared stiff, really, because I had done all my homework. I had this character down pretty well. I had my whips and chains and sawed-off shotguns and all the things that I needed. But I wasn't too sure what kind of reception I'd get.
Right.
I didn't know if I'd get, pitchforks and torches, or, you know, if I'd get ostracized from the community for even suggesting this. And it's funny because the New London Day, the paper was there. They heard that this slave catcher was going to talk, and they had a photographer there, and they took a picture of me as before I went into the barn to do my thing. And I've had people say, you know, you look like a determined slave catcher. I said, how about I was scared to death?
Yeah.
I said, I just hope they don't stone me. you
Right,
know?
yeah.
But I remember walking in, and I remember thinking, I got to do this. I got to do this. And I remember they introduced me as Coswell Timms, and I can remember just what I said. I said, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is indeed Coswell Elias Timms. I am from the great state of Georgia. That's Empire State of the entire South. So down in my neck of the woods, folks call me Master of Hounds. I am most pleased to make your acquaintance and be with you this fine afternoon. So, that was my first thing, that I had to say that, and two people got up and left immediately, insulted, I think, just because I had some of the, I think I had some of the chains and whips and stuff hang on the table that I was going to demonstrate. Two people cried, and one was the reporter. When I gave this presentation, she actually cried. Slavery, I could see where you could cry over slavery. People cried when they read Uncle Tom's Cabin,
Right.
But most people did just what I hoped they would do. They asked great questions.
Right.
And they said, what kind of person are you? They said, do you think you're a good man? Those are great questions.
Right.
Yes, I think I'm a good man. Yes, I love my family. Yes, I love my neighbors. I make pretty good money too, and you know what, it's legal. And I would go on about, and they said, yeah, but look what you're doing. I said, doing to human property? And I did a couple of things, Jim, early on with Coswell Timms to make him a little more useful as a tool. I did not want to be chewing tobacco like a slave catcher might. I didn't want to be using the N-word like a slave catcher might. I didn't want to be ignorant and certainly not be able to write, because if I couldn't write, I couldn't even sell a book.
Right.
So I gave Coswell a mother, Hattie Timms. Oh, Hattie Timms, she's a wise woman. And Hattie Timms gave him his love of learning, and his daddy, Obadiah Timms, sent he and his brother Jesse to the Milledgeville Academy, which was just a kind of a one-room school type of thing. But he at least learned to read, write, and cipher. So Coswell Timms had a little bit of education, and Coswell Timms had a little bit of philosophical orientation, so he could take you through this and not just spit tobacco juice all over himself in the process.
Right.
So I got a good spokesman, and that's what I wanted out of that first thing. And by the way, the picture of Coswell Timms on the cover of the Lime Times was voted Picture of the Year.
No kidding.
And the story was the story of the year. So I said, I got to write a book. I mean, I've got a character that is worth something, and I think I can sell this in book form. So.
Well, I too write historical fiction, I guess, is, basically, though mine are murder mysteries set in the early 1900s.
Right.
I too have been called to task for a few things. In my book, one of the main characters hands an 8-year-old a cigarette because back then they thought smoking was like a cure-all for almost everything.
Right.
People call me, but I say, but that's the things that you have to own. I mean, that was
Right.
the way people thought back then. That's how. It's funny how I'm a big old movie buff. Love old movies, and
Do you watch with a critical eye
Yes.
for anachronistic? I do too.
I do.
Yeah.
And but I am also very, very surprised at the attitudes and things that are said and done, and the way they portray stereotypical people. I'm just like, I'm looking at them, I go, how the hell did they get away with that?
Yeah.
How they, you couldn't show that now. You couldn't show, but it's one of those things. Right or wrong, I'm not a big believer of tearing down Civil War statues and trying to rewrite history.
Right.
I wasn't happy when they took John Mason out of Mystic.
He's up in Windsor now.
Right. But, to me, that's just, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to call it like Nazi book burning.
Right.
But it's, you can't, you have to own.
Yeah. Let's call that, I would agree 100% with, let's call that short-sighted.
Right.
Anybody that is going to get all over George Washington because he was a slave owner has no understanding of history or contextual history. They are trying to apply the standards of today, egotistically I might add, to a time where it did not apply.
Right.
It did not apply. Let me give you 7 names, if I can remember them. Betty, Bazella, Desiree, Martha, Minter, Timothy, Hamilton, and Jethro. Those are the names of 7 slaves from out on Block Island in a 1767 will. The will belonged to a Littlefield by the name of Caleb. He's a 9th generation direct ancestor. There's my tie-in with slavery right there. And I'm not going to go around and try to compare today with then. I'm not going to take blame for that. But at the same time, neither am I going to say, that didn't matter, because the money from those slaves went into our family. And that, after generation after generation after generation, continued to benefit our family. There's a lot of insurance companies, by the way, that are very big today. They got their money doing slaves, insuring slaves. And so there's colleges that were given their charter by influential families who got their money from slaves. So this legacy bleeds into the present or the future. There's no such thing as, one thing, you're in one area and that's all you need to care about. You do need to care about history, but when you go back there, don't carry your present attitudes with you.
Yeah.
You got to go back in and get a new entrance card.
Yep.
And
I do believe that. I think that, like we said before, knowing your past and understanding it, it gives you much better understanding of your future and how much better things can be, are, and still can be today.
Sure. Sure.
And hiding mistakes that we made in the past and stuff just doesn't benefit anybody.
No, it doesn't profit anybody to sweep anything under the table. And that's why this issue of slavery, Jim, it does need to be addressed. It needs to be addressed. I can't tell you the number of times I've debated this issue and people have said, I never owned a slave, I don't have anything to do with it. And this is the land of equal opportunity. Blacks, whites, we all start at the same place. Well, in a sense that's true, but we're not equal baggage people. And if your family suffers from cultural baggage, you're not starting in the same place. I taught school for 48 years, and every group of 9th graders that I had, that I looked out at, they were equal. This is an equal opportunity class. I'm not going to be prejudiced against anyone, but this kid over here doesn't read well, and this kid over here doesn't even know the language well. He just came in from Central America, and this kid, they're not all the same.
Right.
You know, so you can't expect the exact same thing from everybody. So history has colored those things. History has made those things. When you have people enslaved for hundreds of years, where you try to keep them ignorant, where you do not allow the normal family dynamics, you do not allow them to marry, you don't even allow them in many ways to discipline their own kids, or that could be usurped by the white establishment. You know, what does that do to a culture? You know, even though this is not true of the culture today, that baggage is very much there. So, you know, there's places I haven't been able to go because I'm a slave catcher, or an ex-slave catcher. And I think sometimes the African American community might be a little reluctant to open the door to me. But the bottom line is, I'm good for them. I'm a good witness for them. I can talk about what happened to them. And I can see it through the eyes of Coswell Timms, you know, and he has a lot of very positive things to say in kind of an offhanded way about the intelligence of the people he's chasing.
Okay. Well, sum it up in your books. What do you hope people will get out of reading your books?
I want to continue to teach. That was something that I loved from day one, and I'm now in this time period, kind of locked into this time period, and I'd like to be able to clear away a little bit of the misunderstanding of this time period. And I'd like to look at slavery with an honest eye and see what the North doesn't realize how much it's responsible for that. We didn't have a chance to talk about that, but it's certainly true. So I'm hopeful that I'm an ambassador from the past, and that I can bring something, like we said, of value to, you know, the people today.
Good. I do believe. Well, I think you're a great ambassador. Number one.
Oh, thank you.
Your books are really great. They're very entertaining too.
Thank you.
And you plan on doing more?
I'm planning on doing a third one.
Good.
Yeah, I had planned a trilogy. That'd be about Reconstruction.
Good.
So that would be if I live long enough, or
Yeah.
if I don't run out of energy. You know how it is.
Right.
But I have plans for it. I have a storyline for it. It's probably 3 years away.
Yeah.
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 But I love the Slave Catcher's Woman was the first one. The second one was Slave Taker, The Promise. That goes through the Civil War. This one would be the finishing touches on a really, really unknown time period called Reconstruction.
Yeah. That'd be great. Good. I'm looking forward to that. Well, I'm sorry, but we're out of time, believe it or not. I just want to thank everybody, and I want to thank you, Jim, very much for coming on today.
Thanks,
It was
Thanks
it
very
was a
much.
great, very informative.
My pleasure.
Also want to just show a little shout out to CAPA, the Connecticut Authors and Publishers Association. Both me and Jim belong to it. It's a great place for anybody that has anything to do with the written word, whether you're an author, want to be an author, illustrator, publisher, agent. We meet every third Monday at 6:30 at the Regency in Groton. It's open to the public. Welcome to all. Great group of knuckleheads.
Sure is.
And, you know, we come and check us out, please. And I want to thank you very much for tuning in today. And have a great day.